At 6:12 on a Wednesday morning, Solstice Grid Holdings brought steel to Mercy Flats. 4 survey trucks crossed first, then 2 graders, 1 excavator, and a lowboy trailer carrying a yellow bulldozer wide enough to swallow the ranch road whole. The foreman never asked permission. He stepped into the dust with a clipboard in his hand and an easement stamped with 3 corporate seals. The paper said Elias Crowder had given Solstice the right to cut a high-voltage corridor through the middle of his ranch for the next 99 years. It said he had agreed to let them trench across his north pasture, tear out the pump house, and level the line of wind-bent cottonwoods that had kept his cattle alive through 40 summers. It said he had signed. Elias stood on the porch in a faded canvas coat, rebuilding a cracked leather gasket from an old windmill pump. His hands were steady. His boots were older than the young lawyer walking toward him. The lawyer's name was Devlin Orr. His suit looked expensive and doomed. "Mr. Crowder," Devlin called, holding the easement where Elias could see it. "This is a recorded access instrument. You had 30 days to object. That period expired at midnight." Behind him, the bulldozer coughed black smoke into the blue morning. Corinne Vale climbed out of the lead SUV. She was Solstice's regional acquisitions director, a woman who spoke in numbers and never in apologies. "Elias," she said, as if they were friends, "we can still make this dignified. Step inside. Let the crew work. You'll be compensated under the schedule." Elias wiped his thumb across the leather gasket, set it beside him, and came down the porch steps slowly. He looked at the paper. Then he pointed to the signature box. "That there," he said, "is not my name." Devlin gave him a practiced smile. "It is the name attached to your verified identity packet." Elias nodded once. "Juniper Crowder. That's correct." Elias looked past the lawyer toward the pump house, a leaning square of weathered boards with a rusted tin roof, and a little mound of stones under the east wall. "Juniper never owned a ranch," Elias said. Devlin's smile thinned. "She was listed as your authorized household signer." "She was a blue healer," Elias said. "She died 7 winters ago, buried right there, where your man parked his excavator." The engines did not shut off at first. The men in hard hats did not laugh. Even Corinne Vale's face changed. Not much, but enough. The kind of change that happens when a clean lie touches something dirty and alive. Devlin looked down at the signature, then at the pump house, then at Elias. "That is impossible." Elias reached into his coat pocket and took out a brass dog tag, rubbed nearly smooth from years on a collar. On one side it said Juniper. On the other, Harney County license. "She was better at reading cattle than most men," Elias said. "But she never learned to type." A county recorder's truck came over the rise at that exact moment, followed by Sheriff May Hart's cruiser, dust lifting behind them in a pale sheet. Elias had not raised his voice. He had not drawn a weapon. He had not stepped in front of the blade. He had done something worse. He had read the paper. Mercy Flats sat in the hard country east of the Steens, where the sagebrush grew low, and the wind could sand the paint off a gate. Elias Crowder had been born there 76 years earlier, in the back room of the same house where he now slept alone. The ranch was not pretty in the way developers understood pretty. It was dry flats, rim rock, cattle trails, spring boxes, and 7 miles of fence that always needed work. But under the dirt ran water rights older than the highway. Across the north pasture ran the only practical route for Solstice's Copper Sun corridor, a $2 billion transmission line designed to carry desert solar power toward Portland, Seattle, and every investor presentation that needed a clean green future on the final slide. For 2 years, Solstice had tried to buy him. At first they sent brochures, glossy paper, drone pictures, smiling families under solar panels. Elias used the brochures to light the stove. Then came certified letters. Then calls from offices in Denver and San Francisco. Then Corinne Vale herself, stepping out of a white SUV with a bottle of imported water, and an offer folded in a blue folder. The first offer was $800,000. The second was $2 million. The last one was a one-time payment of $6.4 million for a perpetual access corridor that would split Mercy Flats in half, cut off his winter pasture from the spring water, and make the old calving shed worthless by spring. Corinne called it generational wealth. Elias called it selling the throat of the ranch. No, he told her. She had smiled. Everyone has a number. Elias looked at the cottonwoods bending in the wind. Paper has numbers, he said. Ground has memory. Corinne did not like men who spoke that way. It made them hard to price. Solstice had deadlines. Permits were tied to financing. Financing was tied to construction milestones. Construction milestones were tied to a tax credit schedule that could turn a $2 billion project into a corporate wound if the corridor was not cleared before summer. One old rancher had become a problem no spreadsheet could flatten. So Solstice found another path. It began with a green postcard mailed to ranchers across 3 counties. Free mineral lick rebate. The card claimed a feed supplier was offering a discount for cattle operations affected by drought. All Elias had to do was return the card with a household name, mailing address, and signature for delivery verification. The print on the back was so small, it looked like a gray stain. Elias put on his reading glasses. Buried in the 4th paragraph was a permission clause. It did not say easement. It did not say transmission corridor. It said the signer authorized identity confirmation for related landowner services. Most men would have thrown it away. Elias laughed once, took a blue pen, and wrote the name of the only creature in his house who had never lied to him. Juniper Crowder. Then he mailed it back. 3 weeks later, a 99-year easement appeared in the Harney County Recorder's system, signed by Juniper Crowder, verified through a third-party digital identity service, notarized in Nevada by an automated credentialing vendor at 2:13 in the morning, attached to Elias Crowder's land parcel. The paper looked official enough to frighten a clerk and clean enough to impress a judge. It carried stamps, barcodes, packet numbers, server certificates, and the cold confidence of a machine pretending to know a man it had never met. But Solstice had made one mistake. They thought Elias was ignorant because he was quiet. He had spent winter nights reading water law by kerosene lamp when the power went out. He knew the difference between a deed, a lease, an easement, and a recorded instrument that smelled like fraud. His late wife, Ruth, had been deputy clerk for 23 years. She had taught him that paper was dangerous. only when people stopped asking what it was made of. So when the access notice arrived, Elias did not call Corinne. He drove 46 miles to the county seat. He filed a disputed instrument notice at 5:28 in the morning. He carried Juniper's cremation receipt, her county license record, the mineral rebate postcard, the Solstice access notice, and Ruth's old magnifying glass in a shoebox tied with baling twine. By the time the bulldozer reached his cattle guard, the county recorder was already on the road. Sheriff Mayhart stepped out of her cruiser and walked straight to the machinery. "Shut it down." The foreman hesitated until she looked at him. The bulldozer died, then the grader, then the excavator. The quiet came back rough, full of ticking metal and nervous breathing. Corinne Vale moved first. "Sheriff, this is a lawful access operation under a recorded easement." May held out her hand. Devlin gave her the document. The sheriff read the first page, then the signature page. Then she looked at Elias. "Juniper?" Elias held up the dog tag. May turned to the county recorder, a narrow woman named Linda Chow, who had worked too many years behind glass to be impressed by anyone's suit. Linda opened her tablet. "Juniper Crowder," she said. "Female canine, blue heeler. County license expired 7 years ago. Cremation record from Harney Veterinary, February 9th. Devlin's mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. Corinne stepped closer. "Obviously there has been a clerical mismatch." Linda looked at the bulldozer tracks pressed into Elias's ranch road. "A clerical mismatch doesn't lower a blade." Sheriff Hart folded the easement and kept it. "Until the district attorney looks at this, nobody moves dirt on this ranch." Corinne's eyes hardened. "You have no idea what you are obstructing." May glanced at the pump house, then at the steel machines, then back at Corinne. "I know exactly what I'm obstructing." For one day, the story looked simple. A corporation had tried to bully an old rancher and got caught using a dead dog's name. By noon, the local radio station had it. By sundown, every diner in the county had repeated it badly. By the next morning, Solstice's public statement called the incident a vendor-side authentication irregularity. That sentence lasted about 3 hours before the internet found Juniper. There was one old photograph of her, taken by Ruth Crowder on a snow morning. A blue heeler with one ear up, mud on her nose, and the proud, suspicious stare of a dog who had moved cattle through worse weather than most executives had ever seen. The photograph traveled faster than the correction. People laughed because the fraud was ridiculous. Investors panicked because it was not. Solstice's stock slipped 6% before lunch, recovered 2%, then fell again when a reporter asked why a multi-state infrastructure company needed a dead cattle dog to secure land rights. Inside Solstice's Denver office, Corinne Vale told her team to stop putting anything in writing. That was the second mistake. The first had been underestimating Elias. The second was underestimating Ruth. Ruth Crowder had been dead 5 years, but her habits still lived in the house. Every county notice was filed by date. Every tax bill was clipped to its receipt. Every letter from Solstice sat in a flour sack in the pantry. Not because Elias was sentimental, but because Ruth had taught him that arrogant people always left a trail. At first, Sheriff Hart thought the trail would be enough for trespass and forgery. Then Solstice went to court. They did not send Devlin Orr the second time. They sent 12 lawyers and a retired judge on contract. They filed an emergency motion claiming Elias had engineered a bad faith dispute to extract more money from a critical public energy project. They attached aerial maps. They attached financing schedules. They attached letters from county officials who liked the sound of construction jobs. And they attached a sworn statement from Corinne Vale saying Solstice had acted in good faith reliance on a verified digital signature. At 4:40 on Friday afternoon, a temporary access order came through. It did not let Solstice cut the whole corridor. It let them perform non-destructive preparatory activity while the court reviewed the instrument. Non-destructive sounded harmless until the first crew arrived with steel stakes, orange flags, and a plan to mark the pump house for removal. Elias stood at the window that evening and watched surveyors place flags through the grass his cows needed in June. For the first time in the fight, he looked tired. Not beaten, tired. There is a difference. His neighbor Walt came by after dark with a thermos and a warning. "County's turning," Walt said. "They're saying you'll cost folks jobs, saying the line goes around you. It goes around all of us." Elias did not answer. Walt looked at the shoebox on the table. "You could take the money." Elias stared at Ruth's magnifying glass, lying beside the dog tag. "That pump house goes," he said. "The North Spring goes dry by August." "You don't know that." "I do." He had built the bypass himself after the freeze of '91. He knew where the pipe ran. He knew the spring box. He knew the shallow vein of water under that ugly little building. He knew Mercy Flats, in the way a man knows the bones in his own hand. That was the darkest part. Not the lawsuit, not the headlines, not the steel outside his fence. The darkest part was realizing that Solstice did not need to win the truth. They only needed enough paper to damage the ground before the truth caught up. By Monday, the orange flags reached the pump house. By Tuesday morning, an excavator bucket clipped the corner post and tore loose a sheet of tin. Elias heard it from the kitchen, a sound like a rib cracking. He walked outside with the shoebox in his hands. Corinne was there, wearing a hard hat clean enough to shame itself. "Preparatory activity," she said before he spoke. Elias looked at the torn tin on the ground. "That roof covered my water line." "Then you should have accepted relocation." He looked at her for a long moment. "You think you're fighting me?" Corinne folded her arms. "I think I'm completing a project." "No," Elias said. "You're fighting a woman who kept better records than your whole company." At 9:05 that morning, Nora Pike arrived. Nora had been Ruth's closest friend, a former county clerk turned small-town attorney with a bad hip, and a mind that could strip varnish off a lie. She came in a dust-covered Subaru with 2 file boxes in the back, and no patience at all. She spent 3 hours at Elias's kitchen table. She looked at the postcard. She looked at the easement. She looked at the identity packet. Then she asked one question. "Where did the postcard come from?" Elias pointed to the return envelope. Nora smiled without warmth. The return address belonged to a mail house in Boise. The mail house belonged to a marketing vendor. The marketing vendor had a contract with Solstice Grid Holdings. The mineral lick rebate had never been about feed. It was a signature trap. By midnight, Nora had subpoenas drafted. By breakfast, Sheriff Hart had the district attorney on the phone. By noon, Linda Chow found the same packet number attached to 17 other landowner files. Not all had become easements. Some were option agreements. Some were access waivers. One was tied to a grazing allotment belonging to a man who had been in a nursing home for 3 years. Juniper was not a glitch. Juniper was the thread that pulled the seam open. Solstice tried to seal the records. The judge refused. The first production order demanded the identity service logs, mail vendor records, internal approval chain, and every communication related to the Copper Sun Corridor land acquisition program. Corinne's lawyers argued that it would take weeks. The judge gave them 6 hours. At 3:18 that afternoon, the first batch arrived. It did not arrive clean. It arrived with missing attachments, broken file names, and message chains that began in the middle. Nora read them anyway. One email from a Solstice land acquisition manager said, "Rural holdouts are not responding to standard offers. Need passive confirmation route." Another said, "Use rebate campaign to generate identity anchors. Legal can paper the rest if signatures validate." Then came Corinne's reply. "Do not slow corridor clearance over old name discrepancies. If the system clears it, move dirt." Old name discrepancies. That was what Juniper had been reduced to. A dead dog. A forged easement. A $2 billion corridor. An old name discrepancy. Nora printed the email and laid it on the kitchen table beside the brass tag. Elias read it twice. His face did not change, but his hand closed around the edge of the table until the knuckles went white. The hearing took place in a courtroom 3 counties away, because no local room was big enough for the lawyers, reporters, investigators, and ranchers who came to watch Solstice explain how a dead blue healer had become a legal landowner. Corinne Vale sat at the front table, jaw tight, hair perfect, hands folded over a tablet she had not touched in 20 minutes. Elias sat on the other side with Nora Pike and the shoebox. He wore his good hat. Ruth had bought it for him in Burns after a good calf year. It still had a crease where she used to pinch the brim when she teased him. The Solstice attorney began with public necessity. He spoke of regional energy demand, rural investment, climate targets, and the danger of letting one private landowner derail infrastructure that served millions. He was polished. He was calm. He almost made theft sound responsible. Then Nora stood. She did not begin with climate. She did not begin with politics. She held up the green postcard. "Your Honor, this case is not about whether transmission lines are useful. It is about whether a corporation can manufacture consent from a mailer, attach that consent to a dead animal, and send machines before anyone with authority asks a human being what he actually signed." The room went still. Nora placed the postcard on the evidence stand, then the easement, then Juniper's cremation receipt, then the county license, then the email chain. 4 pieces of paper and 1 brass tag did what 12 lawyers could not undo. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Vale, did Solstice know the name on the identity packet did not match the titled landowner?" Corinne did not answer fast enough. Her attorney touched her sleeve. The judge repeated the question. Corinne looked at Elias for the first time since the hearing began. Not at his clothes, not at his hat, not at the idea of him, at him. We believed the discrepancy was non-material. Nora's voice cut in. You believed the owner of record and the signer of a 99-year easement could be different because the computer allowed it? Corinne said nothing. The judge looked at the email again. If the system clears it, move dirt. He read the line out loud. Nobody in the room laughed. That was how the joke died. Not with a punchline, with evidence. The ruling came down at 5:42. The access order was vacated. The easement was void. The court referred the matter for criminal investigation, involving forged instruments, wire transmissions, unlawful recording, and conspiracy to obtain agricultural land access by deceptive means. The Copper Sun corridor was halted across all disputed parcels. Solstice's share price dropped again before the courthouse doors closed. By Friday, federal agents had entered the Denver office. By the following month, Corinne Vale was gone. Devlin Orr was cooperating. And the Copper Sun corridor had become a phrase investors used only in whispers. The final settlement did not come quickly. Nothing with lawyers ever does. But it came. Solstice agreed to remove every stake, repair every fence, rebuild the pump house, restore the North Road, and fund an independent audit of every land access document tied to the project. They also agreed to pay Elias Crowder $32 million. Nora slid the settlement papers across the kitchen table. Elias read every line. Then he read them again. The amount did not make him smile. $32 million is a fortune in a city. On Mercy Flats, it was a strange thing to set beside a dog tag, a magnifying glass, and a roof panel still bent where the excavator hit it. What will you do with it? Nora asked. Elias looked out the window. The cottonwoods were moving in the wind. The pump house stood straight again. The cattle were black dots against the winter grass. The next morning, he drove to the county seat and signed one document. His own name this time. Not a lease, not an easement for a corporation. A land trust. Mercy Flats would stay in cattle, water, sage, and open ground long after Elias was gone. The North Spring could not be sold. The cottonwoods could not be cleared for a corridor. The pump house would remain where Juniper was buried. Part of the settlement repaired neighboring fences and wells damaged by Solstice survey work. Part funded legal reviews for every rancher who had received the same postcard. The rest went into the trust, not as charity, but as a locked gate made of paper strong enough to protect the ground. On the first quiet evening after the final papers were filed, Elias sat on the porch with a brass dog tag in his palm. He had not beaten Solstice because he was louder. He had not beaten them because he was richer. He had beaten them because they mistook official-looking paper for truth and mistook a quiet man for empty land. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. The pump clicked once. Water rose in the pipe. Elias closed his hand around Juniper's tag and listened until the sound steadied. The paper had lied. The ground had not.